I've always really appreciated therapists in private practice who've been very honest and transparent about what it's actually like to work in private practice because I see so many people who talk about the highlights and the freedom and the flexibility, which are all true, but they leave out a lot of big pieces that I feel like don't help people really understand what they're getting into. So I'm going to give you my take on it and really reflect on what it's been like for me in private practice over the last 4 years. I'm going to talk about the highs, I'm going to talk about the lows, I'm going to talk about the challenges, and I'm also going to give you some questions at the end to really think about and ask yourself if you're thinking about private practice and wondering if it's a good fit for you. I remember when I was in grad school, really quick here, that I had a professor who actually said, with no other context, that if you wanted to make money in the mental health profession, you needed to get licensed and be in private practice. And I just didn't realize at the time how just minimal information she was actually giving about a very complex topic, discussion, and decision to make. And I remember that conversation so well because I think it shook everybody in class when we were all like, oh my gosh, we're in grad school. Of course, we want to make money. Of course, we want to succeed. Of course, we want to be able to move on from here. Some people are sitting in the room thinking about all their student debt. And so I think it just scared everybody. And now that I'm licensed and in private practice, I really can look back on that and see how there was a lot of nuances that weren't being talked about. And there wasn't a lot of truth into what she was saying. There was and there wasn't. And so I'm going to break it down for you today as to my personal experience. And I'm going to start out with the positives so that we can stay upbeat here because I think that there are a lot of positives, but I also think there's some negatives, there's some drawbacks, there's some hurdles that you have to jump through, and we're going to get into all of that. So let's start with the positives. So, like I mentioned a minute ago, personally, through my time in private practice, I have definitely loved the freedom and flexibility. The freedom to be your own boss and to, if you want to take off every Friday, go for it. If you don't want to work for 2 weeks over the holidays, that's totally cool. You don't have to ask anybody about approving time off or whether or not you want to take vacation or leaving early if you need to go pick up your kid. Like, there's so much freedom to being able to say, well, I'm in charge. And so if I don't want to work that time or I don't want to work weekends or overnights or I don't want to do certain things, then I absolutely don't have to. And there's just a lot of enjoyment of that. I know that I have always loved that. And I always thought that it was really appealing when people were talking about private practice of, wow, I wouldn't have to like wait for PTO to be approved. I could just like not work Friday if I didn't want to. That's amazing. I don't even have to have a reason to not work Friday. I could just say, I don't want to see clients on Friday and not have to. Like, I love that idea from the get go. And I still absolutely love that. I think as mental health professionals specifically, it really helps for me to maintain good boundaries with my personal life and make sure that I'm having the time to do things that I want to do. I'm taking time for self care. I'm not working myself, to the ground and then being really sick or unwell or unhappy. Like, being able to have that freedom, I think just really helps with the balance between work, life, your personal things, making sure you have time for self care, just all of the nitty gritty that I think really can help people prevent themselves from getting burnt out. And then, of course, the other bonus I think is the flexibility. There's so much flexibility with what I just said. And if I decide a couple months in that I don't like the schedule that I'm working, I can change that up. I don't have to ask for permission. I don't have to wait for that new position to be available at my job. Like, I can just say, okay, well, I don't want to work Fridays all summer long because my kids are home from school and so I don't have to. Or, I don't want to work the evenings during the summer because we've got extracurriculars going on. And so I don't have to. It doesn't have to be where I'm stuck to, I have to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or whatever it is. And there's no flexibility with changing that, which I do find to be really hard just working in the mental health field in general because I mean, we have our own personal lives and things come up and lives, our schedules, it just doesn't always look the same. And so to be able to have that flexibility to say, okay, I'm going to change things in this way right now to work better for my life, for my personal life, for my family, for my needs, whatever that might look like, I think is just absolutely amazing. And I've heard clinicians before talk about how they really like the flexibility too, especially if they're dealing with things like medical issues, they have an ill family member that they're trying to take care of, they are needing to scale back for one reason or another. Like they have that flexibility there. They don't need to ask for that to happen. They don't need to, try to figure out how do I put myself in two places at once. And so I have felt that as well. And I think that's just an amazing, amazing benefit that you just aren't going to get at a lot of agency jobs. Another benefit is I really enjoy getting to work with the clients that I feel like I best serve. I really don't feel like that I'm a good therapist for everybody. And I love the fact that in private practice, I can decide what is my niche and who do I want to see and what type of therapy do I want to provide. Whereas previous places that I've worked, I haven't had any freedom to say that. I was given clients by that agency, and those were the clients that I had to work with. Sometimes, even if I didn't feel like that they were a good fit, which I did a video a couple weeks back just about the challenges with that, the ethical piece to consider with that, the duty to do no harm with that. And so, if you haven't seen that, make sure that you check that out because it's got a lot of really good information in there. But I just feel like it's such a benefit when working in private practice to be able to have that say and say, I want to work with the clients that I feel most aligned with, that I know I'm doing good work with, that want to work with me, that feel like that I'm being helpful, that I'm able to really support in the ways that they need. And then I also leave feeling good about the work that I have provided. So I think that's a huge, huge benefit. I know a lot of other people talk about that as well. It's just something they really enjoy about private practice. And obviously, I love the fact that I am my own boss. I really love that. Like, I think I'm pretty good, and so being my own boss, I get along with me. I I don't have tension with me. Like, I like the fact that I get to be the one to decide and make decisions, and I get to have control over that. That's something that I just feel really kind of resonates with my personality. And I have worked at agency jobs for many years before I decided to work in private practice. And I will say that now that I have been in private practice for 4 years, I struggle to imagine what it would feel like for me to go back to being the employee and not the boss. I know I would do it if I had to for one reason or another. And if that ever comes up, I will do that. I just, once you're your own boss, it really changes the way you look at things, in my opinion. And I just love that I get to be my own boss and that I don't have conflict or tension or disagreements or clashing personalities with supervisors or headaches and frustrations with things that upper management is doing that I don't feel like maybe necessarily align with my beliefs, my code of ethics, my values, what's important to me, which I have felt like that at times. I've worked places where upper management, leaderships, and supervisors really didn't make decisions based off of what aligned with me and felt good or right for me. And so I just like the fact that I don't have to deal with that. And when I feel like that something is right, I can make a decision based off of that. And then that's how I shape my practice and what I do moving forward. So those are all the positives that I can think of at the moment that I feel like just really stick out and I'm constantly reminded of those benefits all the time. I'm sure there's more, but those are the things I feel like that I feel thankful for on a weekly basis and that I'm reminded of on a weekly basis, just how much I really enjoy those things. But of course, there are downsides to working in private practice that I feel like I would be unhelpful to you if I wasn't transparent about that. And I don't see a lot of therapists talking about kind of the challenges, the things that come up, the things that maybe aren't great about private practice that I wish more people talked about because I think that oftentimes private practice gets this kind of narrative where people say like it's the only way that you can make money. It's the only way you can be happy, with the clients that you're serving. It's the only way you can do X, Y, or Z. And I just don't buy that because I think that that is just such a blanket statement. And I know lots of people who have no desire to work in private practice. They make great money as mental health professionals and they love what they do and where they work. So I don't feel like that private practice is the answer to everyone's problems. And so I want to get into my personal experience with just some of the challenges or the kind of downsides to working in private practice from my view, at least. So, the first downside is that it's a business. When you don't work for yourself, then you don't have to worry about the business stuff. Someone else is worrying about that for you. And when you work in private practice, it is a business. And so your priority has to also be on the business, keeping the business afloat, keeping the lights on, keeping money coming in. You are the one that's answering to anything business related. And I feel like that's kind of a challenge at times for me personally, but also just the downside because I have to also split my time and think about that and put energy and work into the business. And that actually requires a lot more of my time versus if I worked at an agency where I went in, I saw my clients, I did my notes, I was part of a treatment team or whatever, and then I left and I pieced out for the day. Like it's not like that. And so I think one of the downsides is that you have to know how to run a business. And I don't know about you, but that was not talked about at all in any of my education or my grad school experience. And I actually think that grad schools really need to better prepare people for what it's like to be in private practice specifically, especially if there's other professors out there giving similar advice to what I received when I was in grad school. But there wasn't like there was no information on things that you need to know about running a successful business. And that's a huge learning curve that I feel like a lot of people don't even realize that they have to learn. And so the downside for me is it's a business. And so I have to make business decisions. I have to think like a business owner, which I feel like sometimes really kind of doesn't always go 100% with the way that we are taught as mental health professionals to think. And strictly from a place of when you're a therapist, you're thinking about how to support the client and you're thinking about the work with them, and you're not thinking about the money aspect and keeping the lights on and making business decisions and having employees and all of this stuff. And so I feel like they don't always go hand in hand, and in a way where everything seems like simpatico, if that makes sense. Like, and this is where I feel like it would be helpful for colleges to have a class on like, okay, how do you work in private practice and how do you deal with the business side of things so that you can continue to show and be a good therapist while also protecting your time, making sure that your finances are in check, making sure that you're making decisions that are aligned with keeping the business open and not just seeing everybody, pro bono and never making any money and, all of those things. So for me, the downside is it's a business. And so I have to really have a lot of time to focus on the business thing too, which after seeing clients all week, sometimes I'm just really tired and I feel like I don't have the mental bandwidth to think about that, which is hard. It's not always easy for sure. Another downside for me is it's not guaranteed income. So when you work at an agency, you're most likely guaranteed an hourly rate or you're getting a salary. And so there's this lack of worry there about, am I going to get paid this week? And how much am I going to make this week? And what happens, do I have to worry about not getting paid if my clients, don't show up or if I have less clients this month than last month? I know some agencies, especially if you're working at like a contractor, like hourly rate, then yes, you have to worry about some of those things. If you're salaried though, then you don't. You get paid whether you have 20 clients this month or you only have 10. And so I think the downside to private practice that I don't see a lot of people talk about is there isn't a guaranteed income. And so you really have to think about that and how that's going to work in your life because I think I can speak for everybody. Like, we all want to get paid, we all want to make money for the work that we're doing. And it can be really worrisome and stressful to have to worry about what happens if I don't make money while still running a business, like I just said, holding space for clients, being a good therapist, taking care of yourself, just all the things. It's not easy. It's a lot of stress. So the downside for me is that it's not guaranteed income. And for some people, that's obviously going to be what keeps them from private practice. But for myself, that wasn't something that I felt like was a deterrent for me to enter private practice. I actually saw that as a challenge where I thought to myself, okay, so it really is on me as the boss to keep this open, keep the doors open, and I need to work my tail off to make sure that income keeps coming in. And so I felt like it was a motivator for me, but I know that not everybody's personality is like that. And so definitely something to consider because it is a downside to working in private practice. And that includes, there's not a consistent income that you're going to meet every month. So for me personally, I am really like the busiest in the summer. And that has been that way since I have opened my practice. The fall and the winter, especially around the holidays, is not typically busy for me. People have too much going on. They've got holiday plans, they're traveling, have a lot of other expenses. And so I don't see that be a really busy time for me. And I know for some therapists, I've heard the opposite, where like summer is pretty slow for them because they work with, children, but they are really, really busy the other months. And so regardless of what that looks like, I do think that it's important to understand that not every month is going to look the same. And I have never experienced that in my business. I've had some months where I've made a lot more than other months because I've been a lot busier. And I have some months where I'm like, okay, that like really wasn't a good month because it's just not consistent. So I do feel like that's a downside in some ways because it would be a lot nicer if it was just something that I could anticipate that was always going to be consistent, but there's just not a foolproof way I think that you can always just plan for that because life happens. And yes, you might have 50 appointments scheduled for this month and only 40 of them show up because you had no shows, you had people who decide not to start treatment, you had people who had to cancel for one reason or another, and you cannot prevent that from happening. It's going to happen. So I think that's a downside and something that we have to be just more open about as therapists in private practice of like, hey, you the money isn't the same, and that actually has a lot of benefits to it because I think there's a lot of potential to make a lot of money. And then also there's times where it's not going to be as busy. And what do you do about that? So for me, that's a downside. And then, of course, the other piece is, I mean, you're in charge, and that really can have a downside to it. Like I just said, I love being my own boss, but I'm also in charge. And so if I don't do marketing, that falls on me. I can't blame that on anybody else. I can't wonder like why is my phone not ringing if I haven't done the marketing that I need to. And so I do feel like that's a downside of private practice is like you're in charge. And so you're trying to, and I have felt this so deeply, like I'm trying to be there for my clients. I'm trying to be a therapist. I'm seeing X amount of clients a week and keep up with my documentation and do all these things. And then I'm struggling to find the time sometimes to work on my business. And so I can't blame that on anybody, right? Like I'm in charge and that comes with a lot of benefits, like I've talked about. But I think it's also a downside of like, I don't have anybody who's doing those things for me. Which, if you are hiring this out, then you absolutely can have someone who does that for you. Of course, it comes with a cost though. And I myself have hired people to do certain things throughout my business. And also, I have found that I really needed to save that money and to put that back into the business. And so I've had to learn how to do a lot of things myself. And so being in charge, it's it has its moments where it's great. And then it also has its moments where I feel like it's just a downside because I've got to wear all the hats and I only have so much time in a week to dedicate to that. So something to definitely consider for sure. And so that kind of leads me into my personal experience with just challenges that have arose. And what I was just talking about is definitely a challenge that I continue to struggle with and I am trying to be better at every single day when it comes to my business. And that is I don't have a lot of time to work on my business. I work in my business, but I don't have a lot of time to work on my business. And so, networking, doing marketing, things like that, I think really require a lot of time. And if they're done right, they require a lot of time. And this is why big agencies, they have a marketing department. They have people who do these things, like a whole department dedicated to them because it's a full time job. And so for me, one of the challenges has just been finding the balance with time to get it all done and to not just work in the business, but also work on the business. And outsourcing can help while also outsourcing can be expensive. And so, if it's just you working in the private practice or just you and maybe like one or two employees, then there may not be a lot of that extra cash to go around. And so I think that the challenge can be of where do I put my money and outsource and where do I put my time and where do I try to save money? And then how do I navigate all of that while still potentially having a full caseload and showing up for my clients, doing continuing education, taking the necessary time off for self care and all of that. So I just feel like the balance of doing the business side of things is definitely a challenge for me that I'm continuing to try to just figure out as I go. And I've definitely gotten a lot better at it in some ways. And I will say that this is also very seasonal because there's been times where I've been really busy in my life where I'm like, I just don't have the time to dedicate 2 hours to marketing this week. And as a business owner, like I feel the effects of that. Another thing that I have personally felt the challenge with is when you go and you start working in private practice, the ramp up is slow. Like when you have an agency job, and I worked, at places before where when once I'm done training, we're like hitting the ground running, and all of a sudden, after maybe a couple of weeks, I have a full caseload. That has not been my experience in private practice. The buildup has been a lot slower. I mean, you've got to network, you got to get out there. People have to find you, they have to agree to start treatment. Like, there's a time lag here. It's not just I open my practice tomorrow and by next Tuesday, I am flooded and I am full. So for me, the challenge has been the fact that there is a slow ramp up to get clients. And I have felt this in two instances. I felt this when I first opened my business back 4 years ago. And then I felt this when I came back off of maternity leave. So I took maternity leave for about 4 months in a slow season. I took it over the winter. And I coming back in after the holidays was not anticipating how slow of a buildup it was going to be, and that was a challenge for me because I was hoping that I was going to go back to being, just as busy as I was before I left on leave, and a lot had changed politically. A lot had changed in the world. A lot of things had changed with insurance, and so the ramp up was slower for me than what I had seen even when I opened my practice, several years before that. And so a challenge is it's a slow start and you've got to have patience. And there's been times where that's really tested my patience and I have wondered, am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing this? I mean, when I first started out, I had several just weeks of like worry of did I make the right decision? Is this going to work? Like, was I a fool for thinking this? And I held on and I kept moving and I kept growing and I kept figuring out what I didn't know and I kept working on it. But it took diligence and it took patience and it took time. And that is just a challenge to have to navigate while still again showing up for clients and still having your own life going on, like your own finances and needing to pay your bills and just all that stuff. So I think it's a challenge that a lot of people I think it's a challenge a lot of people don't talk about that I want to be transparent with you about because it's definitely been a struggle for me at times. And the other thing that I have felt like has been a really big challenge is I have really had to push myself to get out there and market. I have never worked in an agency before where I had to be the face of marketing or I had to go out and get my clients before I worked in private practice. And so this has been a personal challenge for me in an area of growth because I don't like that. Like, I don't like the marketing piece. And there are a lot of ways that you can market. And I've had to figure out like what works for me and my personality and what I have time for and just what feels authentic to me and the brand that I'm trying to, create. But that is a challenge. Again, like I said earlier, when you run a business, you are HR, you are the primary therapist, you are the supervisor, you are the marketing department, you are the billing department. Like you are all of those things. And so it's understandable if the one or more of those things just doesn't come naturally to you or you just don't like it. Um, but as a business owner, if you're not going to outsource it, you've got to do it yourself. And so for me, the personal challenge has just been figuring out just all the things I didn't know about marketing and SEO and making time to make sure that I'm networking and figuring out how to, enhance my presence on Google and just doing all these things that, again, no one ever taught me. I never knew. And I've had to learn through my own just research and my own conversations and questions I've asked people who have known more than me to really try to figure out what works for me. So that's definitely been a challenge and something that I do continue to struggle with at times of just I don't like that aspect of it, but you got to do it if you want to stay in business. Okay, so I've talked about the positives. I've talked about the just the negatives, or not even negatives, but just the downsides. And I've also talked about my own personal challenges. And so I want to end this video by giving you some questions to really think about and answer for yourself because I am definitely not of the mindset that everybody should go into private practice. In fact, I'm so against that. I myself, like I've said in this video, I am glad that I went into private practice and reflecting on my business over the past 4 years. I'm so glad that I made the leap when I did, when it felt right for me and in that time of my life, and it just felt aligned. Um, and also, I don't think private practice is a good fit for everybody. So I've come up with some questions that I want you to ask yourself if you're on the fence about, starting your own private practice, if you've been considering it but aren't sure, or if you are newly into private practice and you're kind of questioning, like, do I want to continue with this? Is this going to be a good long-term plan for me? So the first question is, do I want to run a business? You got to get clear on that. Do you want to run a business? Because running a business and working at a business are two totally different things. And so genuinely ask yourself, do I want to run a business? Not just say that I own a business, but to actually do the scut work, to get in there, to wear all these hats, to make the decisions, to really have it all fall back on me. Like, do I want to run a business? And it's a loaded question. So really think about it for a minute and really think, is this what I really want to do? The next question is, what is my financial situation like? I see sometimes where people they don't really think about what I said earlier, which is business is a slow growth. And so you're not going to come right out of the gate opening your practice and be full. And they don't think about that. And then they get into it and they're like, okay, they said I could make money. They being, the people of the world who are talking about private practice and not talking about the challenges or the downfalls like I am. But they said I was going to make money. They said that clients would be banging on my door and my phone hasn't rang and I only have a couple clients or I'm struggling to get my first couple of clients. Like, how am I supposed to get paid? Right? Like, really think about, what is my financial situation like? Can I afford to open up my own business? Can I afford to leave my full time job? Or do I need to consider maybe working my private practice in the evenings or on the side for a while until I can get to a place where financially it makes more sense? Do I have the savings to make this work? And what I mean by that is, do I have money set aside where I can invest in startup costs and I can not get paid for the first several months that I'm in business for myself and it not be a big stressor on my life? This is so important because if you don't have any savings, you don't have any money to dedicate to putting into to start the business, or you're living paycheck to paycheck, then this is not going to be a financial situation that is necessarily going to feel easy to do. So, really asking yourself financially, am I in a good place to give this a go? And that kind of leads me into another question, which is, do I need to start gradually? I personally jumped right into private practice, and I would not recommend that route for a number of reasons. And so, really think about, is that something that's going to be feasible for me, or do I need to start gradually? Maybe see a couple of clients in the evenings or on the weekends for a little bit, get my feet wet, make sure this is what I'm liking, this is what I want to do, make sure that financially this makes sense before making the big transition. Another question is, do I mind not having benefits or perks that my job or an agency job might give me, such as paid time off, um, paid holidays, vacation time, contributions to a retirement account, or people having a 401k? Like, these are things that when you work in private practice for yourself, they're going to look very different. So, are you okay with the benefit situation looking different and you having less benefits and having to put more money out on your side to still have things like a 401k, to still get paid time off, to do all of those things that you want to do? And the last question is, do I want to be in charge? That is such an important question because it's not just about you being in charge of your schedule. It's not just about being in charge of what you make per hour. It's about, do I want to be in charge? Do I want to be the person that's wearing all the hats and answering all the questions that everyone comes to when they need something, that's in charge of everything? Do I want to be that person? Because it's a big responsibility. And it's definitely something that I don't think a lot of people really think about, what that looks like and if that feels like a good match and fit for them. I'm sure there's lots of other questions. In fact, if you have any that you feel like would be helpful to think about, please leave them below in the comments. But those are the ones that I feel like that really, I really want you to ask yourself and get clear on before making a decision moving forward. As I've said in this video countless times, I think private practice is great. There's so many positives and benefits to working for myself that I love. And I'm so glad that I made that switch when I did. And also, I would not be transparent if I didn't say that it doesn't come with challenges. There is risk involved. Money does not just fall out of trees. You've got to work for it. You have to have determination. You have to have grit, and you have to really continue to stick with it. So Definitely some things to think about if you are in that boat of, is this a good fit or not for me? And I hope that my just video for you today has been helpful with just giving you a pretty honest and real look of what it's been like for me being in private practice for the past 4 years. Everyone's experience is different, but this has been my take on it. And I hope that something in here was helpful for you. All right, until next time.